Okay, hi everyone. So today we're hosting Anne Connelly, who's kindly giving us a session on the one-on-one of blockchain and decentralization. Anne is really passionate about harnessing blockchain and decentralized technology to transform the lives of people in developing countries. She's faculty at Singularity University, teaching global leaders how exponential technologies can solve problems that impact over 1 billion people. She has been an active part of the global blockchain community since 2012 and has worked with notable companies. She previously worked with Doctors Without Borders Canada in Central African Republic and the DR and Congo, and currently she serves on their board of directors. She has a Bachelor of Life Sciences from Queen's University and an MBA from McMaster University and a Fintech Certificate from MIT. She was honored as one of CBC's 12 Young Leaders Changing Canada and one of the 50 Most Inspirational Women in Technology in Canada. And we're really honored and we're very happy to have you today with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here. It's great. Let me get my slides up here.
Yes.
Looks good?
It's loading, and I guess it's gonna
Okay.
load. Yes, looks perfect.
All right, so I want to kick off this morning by asking you all a pretty simple question. I want to know, if I asked, would you loan me $20 right now? Yes, no, if you said yes, thank you. That's great. If you said no, don't worry. That's a completely normal response. The reality is you don't know me at all. You don't know what I want the money for. You don't know what my repayment history is like. The reality is you can't necessarily trust me. And so when you look back in history to a time where everyone lived in tiny towns and villages, every person that you transacted with was someone that you knew and someone that you could trust. And so every transaction had trust inherent in that process. But as small towns grew to cities and global commerce expanded, this just wasn't possible anymore. At some point in time, you had to transact with someone that you didn't know and couldn't necessarily trust. And this was the beginning of centralized trust providers, essentially intermediaries like governments, banks, corporations that would sit at the center of these transactions and provide trust when two people couldn't trust each other. And we've actually built most of our society on this type of model, and it works pretty well. When you think about all the transactions we make on a daily basis, almost all of them have some kind of centralized intermediary as a part of that. But the problem with this type of system is when you can't trust the trust provider, your entire society starts to break down. And so I have good news for you. The future is decentralized. So today we're going to talk all about how decentralization is essentially enabling us to reimagine the structure of our entire society right from scratch. And we'll talk about how blockchain technology is what's enabling us to re-envision the world that we live in. So I hope you guys are excited. I want to start today by bringing everybody up to speed on what blockchain is, because it's kind of one of those terms that gets thrown around and might not completely understand. So there are many different blockchains out there. Blockchain is just a word for an infrastructure level technology, and it's something you can build other things on top of. But at the core, a blockchain is just a ledger. It's a record of transactions. That's it. So if you imagine if every financial transaction that happens every day around the world between people and banks and companies and stores, if all of those transactions were stored in one record, that's kind of like a blockchain. Now with blockchains, all those records are stored in little chunks called blocks. And the blocks are connected in the format of a chain, hence the word blockchain. Now, what's cool about these is that each block is cryptographically connected to the block before it. But you can kind of think about it as though each block has a little Polaroid picture of the block before it coded right in. So if I wanted to hack one of the transactions, not only would I have to hack the block my transaction is in, but every single block that came after it. Otherwise, that little Polaroid picture wouldn't match. Now, I want you to remember three important properties about blockchain. The first is that they're public to all users, which means that If you have a private blockchain, say one that might be used between a network of banks, all the banks in that network can see all the transactions. But if you have a public blockchain like Bitcoin or Ethereum, then every person in the world can see every transaction. So if you loan me $20 and I said, oh, I never got the money, I don't owe you anything, you can quickly point to the transaction on the blockchain and prove to everyone that you did in fact send the money and I did receive it. The second property is that blockchains are immutable, which means once a transaction has been made, it can't be edited or deleted. So if you sent me $20, I couldn't go in and edit the transaction to say that you had only given me $2. It's just not possible. The third property is that blockchains are power-proof, which means that even if I knew the creator of a particular blockchain, I couldn't go and say, hey, listen, like I need you to turn off the blockchain because I can't pay this money back and I need you to shut the whole thing down. It's not possible. Even the creator of a blockchain itself cannot turn off the blockchain. But if there's one property of blockchains that I want you to remember more than any other, it's this. It's that blockchains are decentralized, which means that a copy of the chain is stored on thousands of computers all over the world. And these are computers like my laptop, like some guy in China's desktop computer, someone in Kenya's computer. And so even if I were able to hack into that one block where my transaction is and hack every single block that came after it, not only would I have to do that, but I would have to do it on at least half of all of these computers at exactly the same time. And for that reason, blockchains are virtually unhackable. And subsequently, they're a single source of truth for every person on the planet. We can go back to transacting in a peer-to-peer fashion the way we did when we lived in villages, but do it at a scale that's never previously been possible. Vitalik Buterin, who's the founder of the Ethereum blockchain, sums up blockchains perfectly. He says, whereas most technologies tend to automate workers on the periphery doing menial tasks, blockchains automate away the center. So instead of putting the Uber driver out of a job, blockchains put Uber, the company, out of a job and lets the drivers work with the customers directly. So essentially, blockchains enable us to disintermediate all of these centralized trust providers. And when you think about it, almost everything we do in society is built off the base of these centralized providers. So it's going to give us the opportunity to completely redesign the way we structure our society without these intermediaries. And to begin to imagine what a society like that might look like, you have to start at the bottom with people. So I ask you, what makes a human being a person? And the answer to that question starts with a passport. It's my passport, actually. A couple of months ago, before the COVID lockdown, I was traveling through Europe and I had a layover in London before I flew back home to Canada. And I got to my gate and I realized that I didn't have my passport with me. Somewhere between my last flight and my next flight, it had fallen out of my pocket. And I'm starting to freak out a little bit because I know that if I can't find my passport, I'm going to miss my flight. I'm going to have to get an emergency passport, buy a very expensive last minute ticket home. All in all, I figure it might cost me $2,000. And it got me thinking about how crazy it is that my freedom as an individual is restricted by a piece of paper that can fall out of my pocket at an airport. And that's because despite being a living, breathing human being, I am not a person unless the Canadian government grants me an identity. Now, what is an identity really? It's three things. It's a claim. I claim I'm Anne Connelly. I might have some proof, like a utility bill or a mobile phone bill with my name on it. And I'd have attestations, like my mom would definitely attest to the fact that I am Anne Connelly. But the only attestation that really matters in today's world is the government's. If the government says I'm Anne Connelly, everyone will believe it. And so in any transaction where I need to have my identity verified, the Canadian government sits as an intermediary as a part of that process, usually by me handing over a driver's license or a passport. Now, I got lucky and I actually found my passport and I made my flight. Yay! But the worst that would have happened to me is I would have lost a bit of money and spent a couple extra days in London. But for many people around the world, their situations could be much worse. Do you know what this is? This is a refugee camp. This is the Zaatari refugee camp, which at one point in time was home to more than 80,000 Syrian refugees. Now there's more than 65 million refugees and displaced people around the world today, and many of them live in camps just like this one. And they're not here for days or weeks. They're here for months, years, and even generations. And sometimes it's not because they don't have anywhere they could go. Often it's because they lack the identity documentation to prove who they are and where they came from, so they can get processed into a new country. In fact, more than 70% of refugees lack identity documentation. And this is a huge problem because it leaves them stuck in camps like this. Blockchain enables people to have self-sovereign identity that essentially disintermediates the government as a centralized player in transactions where identity needs to be verified, and replacing it with blockchain. It means that the individual is the owner of their identity. Now, this concept is kind of weird to think about, so I want to give you a really practical example. This is Santiago Siri and Pia Mancini, two Argentinians who are super passionate about self-sovereign ID. And so when they had their baby girl, Roma, they wanted to be sure that she owned her identity before anyone else did. And so they created a video that included a claim, some proof, and some attestations, and they uploaded that to a blockchain. And this is what that looked like.
Hello, this video is the birth certificate of Roma Siri. So here is Roma Siri. This is Roma with her little friend Pantufla. Roma was born in the UCSF Benioff Children's Hospital. Here you can see her full name, Roma Siri. She was born at this hospital on November 6, 2015 at 2020 hours in the city of San Francisco, planet Earth. Her mother is
Pia Mancini. I was born in Buenos Aires, 12 May 1982.
And her father is me, Santiago Siri, Argentinian, born October 1st, 1983. We have two witnesses, Roma's grandmothers.
I'm Bella Herrero. I was born in Argentina, in Salta, in October the 2nd, 1952.
And the other witness.
I am Maria Marta Estrada, grandmother of Roma. I was born in Buenos Aires, May 30, 1947.
And to prove the timestamp, here we have the last block of the blockchain.
So what he's done here is actually shown the last block that had been uploaded to the blockchain to essentially timestamp the video between a 10-minute window on a particular day. So this video will now live on the blockchain forever and will essentially be the basis of Roma's identity. And over time, when she meets more people, she can add further attestations. And when she has more proof, she can add that, essentially making her identity stronger and stronger as she grows up, which is amazing. Now, this type of identity might seem really far away, not something that's going to happen soon, but the reality is it's already happening. In fall of last year, Brazil issued their first ever Bitcoin or blockchain-based birth certificate to a baby named Alvaro, which is great. So Alvaro will have this blockchain-based birth certificate, and again, he can add all types of attestations and proof so his identity grows over time and becomes stronger. Now, one of the benefits of this type of decentralized IDs is it can actually help stop child sex trafficking. So around the world today, more than 1 million children are trafficked every year. But with a decentralized ID, if someone tries to bring a child across a border, they won't be allowed unless that person is in the inner circle of the child's attestation. So if they're a close or direct family member. Also, if someone makes an attempt to traffic a child, an immutable record will be made so that you can't pay off a corrupt border official to pretend like that attempt had never happened. So this is amazing for children everywhere. And if baby Roma or baby Alvaro decide they want to come to Canada to go to school, they can even get their educational certificates on a blockchain. And this is what that might look like.
Digital credentials are the way of the future. And at McMaster Engineering, we're already there. For instance, we've launched a digital credential for co-curricular activities. And this coming June, every McMaster Engineering undergraduate who graduates will get a digital credential. To do so, we're using the blockchain platform. Why? Because we believe in the sovereign identity of data, that data should belong to the student.
Blockchain is an intriguing technology and its uses are exploding beyond cryptocurrency. This was an excellent opportunity for McMaster to begin to explore blockchain, and this was a really good use case.
Once we give the credential, students own that credential on the blockchain platform. They can share it or keep it private. When they share it with employers have an immediate reason to verify the data.
The notion of being able to verify your diploma by using your phone was a very exciting one for us. Students now can produce it at a moment's notice for an employer, another institution, or even grandma.
Now, showing your degree and your digital credentials to an employer or grandma is great, but the reality is digital identity is so much bigger and so much more important than that. As you may know, there's more than 1 million Uyghurs who are currently detained in China because they are Muslim. This is a huge international issue. And one of the biggest challenges around some of this is that the Chinese government has actually taken away the passport and identity documentation of these people. So they couldn't leave the country even if they were able to make it happen. So for me, when I lost my passport, I would have lost a bit of money and a couple of days in London. But for people like the Uyghurs in China, they have lost the ability to free themselves from oppression, and they can get detained where they might be killed. This is the power of blockchain technology. So we can spend all day talking about which governments are good and which ones are bad. But today, I want you to put yourself in the shoes of someone who lives in a country where the government really doesn't work very well at all. A government like the one in Venezuela. Right now in Venezuela, the inflation rate is more than 10 million%. It's crazy, that number. It's so crazy, it's almost hard to imagine what that looks like. But if you'd invested $1 million in the Venezuelan bolivar about 5 years ago, you'd have less than 37 cents today. In fact, the median wage for a worker only gives them enough money at the end of the day to buy 900 calories of the cheapest food available. People are starving. In fact, more than 15% of Venezuelans are eating garbage as a regular part of their daily diet. So what started as a financial crisis turned into a humanitarian emergency. And it's so bad that more than 15% of the country has actually fled, leading to a migration of Syrian proportions. People are desperate for a store of value, somewhere they can keep their money and know that it won't inflate away into nothing. Some people are going back to the mines to look for gold, and Bitcoin sales are exploding. Because for the first time ever, people have the ability to transact digitally without having government at the center of their transactions. Bitcoin enables people to transact in a peer-to-peer fashion without having to have a centralized trusted party managing the money. Now, as we know, in financial transactions, there's more than just government. There's typically banks and other financial institutions as well. But in the case of Venezuela, Maduro, who's the current president of Venezuela, actually froze the bank accounts of his rival Guaido because he could place his power over the banking system. So remember that third property of blockchain is power proof. If Guaido had kept his money in Bitcoin, this never would have been possible. This photograph is from Gujarat, India in 2015, where more than 1 million people gathered to protest against the caste system and the way the government was oppressing people. Now, going to the public square can be dangerous. You can get injured, you can get arrested, and sometimes you can even be killed. And so when the internet came about, it created this digital public square, a space where people could protest the actions of their government in a much more safe environment, and also collectively organize physical protests to make sure that there were large numbers to prove to the government that there were voices behind the ideas of the people. Now, in India, they got wind of what was going on with these protests, and they actually shut the internet off. They removed the people's accessibility through their cell phones and smartphones, essentially meaning that people couldn't organize and they couldn't share information on social media. Now, if you think this is a rare occurrence, it's not at all. In India, they've shut down the internet more than 154 times in the past 4 years. And it's also a tactic that's used in other countries around the world to essentially silence people's voices. Now, blockchain can help with this as well. There's something called a blockchain-based mesh network, where if you've got one person who has access to the internet, perhaps through a satellite connection or over a border, and it's someone who needs to get a message out to share perhaps atrocities being committed by the government to the media, they can send that message to and through all the phones of the people nearby in their community until it reaches the person with the connection and gets sent out. Anyone who participates in that process will get a small micropayment of cryptocurrency for supporting the network. Which essentially means that because of blockchain, governments can never turn off the voice of their people. Now, many governments are actually getting on board with blockchain in a big way. One of those is the government of Estonia, who's been working with blockchain and blockchain-like technologies since before 2012. They actually have a whole decentralized ID system that enables people to register companies, pay their taxes, these sorts of things, which is great. But one country that I do want to highlight, one city in particular, is the city of Dubai. They've actually pledged to be the world's first blockchain-based city by the end of 2020, which is amazing. So they're putting all kinds of things on blockchain, from bill payments to education certificates, and they're actually looking to save $1.5 billion in efficiencies just because of it. So that's absolutely amazing that there's this great stuff going on in the Middle East. So I want to come back to the story of our refugee, but imagine what their world would be like in a world where blockchain and decentralization are much more pervasive. So imagine they run from their bombed out city with nothing but the clothes on their back and arrive at a place like this. They can, within minutes, open access to their decentralized ID from any internet connected device to prove who they are and where they came from. When they get processed into a new country, they can use all their life savings, which they held in cryptocurrency, to easily convert it to whatever local currency is required, meaning it's going to be easier for them to get set up in their new home. Because their educational certificates are verified on blockchain, it'll be easier for them to get a job and get settled. And for the people who couldn't get out, they can use blockchain-based mesh networks to share what's happening inside their country to the people who can create change. For me, this is the power of blockchain. It's not about Bitcoin investments and bubbles. It's about people and how we're able to give them the freedoms that so many of us enjoy in other places around the world. This is the greatest opportunity we have as a society. Blockchain is giving us the ability to completely redesign how we build the world around us into a world where you have more access to human rights and more access to freedoms. And so 99% of the disruption that blockchain is bringing is still to come. So at the beginning, I asked you if you would loan me $20. And in this world of the future, that money might not be coming from a friend or a family member. I can open up my decentralized ID, show my repayment history to anyone in the world, and create a smart contract to transfer the money. But more than likely, that money will come from someone like much farther away in China or in Kenya or in the Middle East. It doesn't have to be someone close by, but it will still be a peer-to-peer transaction, which is absolutely incredible. So I want to issue you all a challenge. I want you to go home today and buy $1 worth of Bitcoin just to try it out. See what it's like to participate in this amazing new peer-to-peer economy that's built off of decentralization and its principles. And I think you'll really like it. I think it'll be the first time ever you've transacted in this way, where you have blockchain at the center of your transactions, and subsequently you have trust. Thanks very much, and looking forward to hearing your questions.
Thank you so much, Anne. This was amazing. Amazing, incredible. Thank you so much for the very informative and very inspiring actually session.
Thank you.
Thank you. So yeah, we have already one question
Great.
from, let me just check it. Okay, so it's from Ibrahim. So he's saying, as per your definition, I imagine if we start using blockchain in financial sector, it will destroy the banking system around the world. Is that right? After some thinking, not only banking system, but also the world as we know as centralized. So yeah.
Yeah. Your English is great, by the way. And
yeah.
anyone who speaks more than one language is someone that I'm incredibly proud of. So good for you. You're right. I mean, the reality is almost every industry that we have in the world is going to be impacted by this. So if you think about, what industry today doesn't use the internet, almost none. The same thing will apply with blockchain, but I would say even at a greater scale. And so you think about like supply chains, blockchain can help with that. You think about, my goodness, like insurance, literally everything. But banking is one of the first ones that's going to be impacted. So what we're seeing right away is that some banks are getting on board with applying blockchain technology to sort of make a 10% improvement on what they're doing. So to make settlement faster, to make, interbank payments faster. But the real exponential change that we're going to see is exactly what you say. It's when people start using these technologies, Bitcoin, they start transacting more than they are in today's world. Banks are going to be less and less and less required. And so banks essentially are going to have to either pivot to figure out what is the value they're actually adding in this new world, or they're going to go under. And it's really going to give people more control over their money. And, I think it'll be really good.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. So we have another question. What kind of systems can we build using blockchain technology other than eCoin? Okay.
Good reference. Yeah, I mean, I can give you a couple examples of what's going on already. I mean, so supply chain I talked about a little bit. This is it's a really cool piece essentially of blockchain, and it's traceability function. So if you look right now, there's a project where if you buy a bag of soybeans, you can scan the QR code on it and you can see how it's been traced back between every person that's touched that bag of soybeans before you got it. So it goes straight from the farmer who grew them to the trucker who moved them from the farmer to the processing plant, to the next trucker, to the grocery store, to you. And so it really gives you this incredible visibility as to where your products went and came from, but doing it in a way that's completely verified. So every person in that chain has to use their own decentralized ID to scan the fact that they had ownership of it. And so that same type of traceability happens around stuff like valuable art. So if you've got, say, an artist, he verifies the painting, transfers it to someone else, that record gets transferred on blockchain. So if you're buying a painting, you can see the chain of every person who's owned it straight back to the artist. So it's going to really help reduce fraud and that type of thing. And the same thing applies around financial transfers, right? So if you've got, say, like the World Bank or someone makes a big financial transfer to a country, you can actually watch the money trickle down through all the different wallets and all the different sections of the government and see, okay, where was money being siphoned off? Where did money, not go to the place or the people that it was supposed to go to, which is going to dramatically help countries to eliminate some of the issues that they have around corruption, which can be a huge barrier to businesses and that type of thing.
Great. So we have two other questions. We have many questions. Okay.
Great.
So
good questions, folks.
Yes. So cryptocurrencies are also used by black market and by people having doubtful source of money. Do you think this can work?
Yeah, so I mean, you're absolutely right. The black market uses cryptocurrency. They also use cash. They also use the banking system. I think it was HSBC or one of the major banks was involved in massive amounts of money laundering. I think the way to think about it is that Bitcoin is just a tool. It's not good or inherently good or bad. It's just a tool. And so it's really what you use it for. It's like dynamite. You can use dynamite to build roads, or you can use dynamite to hurt people. And so it's really about, you know, who's using it and how does that work? And there's pros and cons to that. You know, I mean, some of the transactions, it can be, while they're all public, it's all like a crazy long number sends money to a crazy long number. So it's pseudonymous in a way. And so if you can figure out who one of those numbers belongs to, then you can start to trace where all their money went. So I think it was the Canadian government recently arrested a child trafficking ring because of their Bitcoin payments and where they were coming and going. But on the flip side, you know, it does make crime a lot easier. So it's really about, less so about, you know, how should we ban it because people are using it for bad things, and more about how can you actually use the properties of blockchain to stop crime, but also enable people to have freedom at the same time.
Okay, so how does data get saved on endpoints? Do users who participate in Bitcoin somehow share a percentage of their local storage? How is this regulated? As in, is it possible for someone who is part of the system to use a lot of their storage and run out of space? And based on what does a blockchain decide on which devices to store a certain transaction, for instance?
Yeah, so there's different levels of participation that you can do with blockchain. So if we say Bitcoin, for example, if you want to just like send Bitcoin to your friends, you can use something called a wallet. It takes up the same amount of space on your phone as an app, and there's really no concerns there. If you want to be a node in the system, so be one of those computers where a copy of the chain is stored, what you can do is download an entire copy of the blockchain and then continually add blocks as they get added. And the benefit of doing that is essentially you're making the blockchain stronger and stronger by having another copy of it essentially out in the world. So if someone's able to, maybe if let's say there's only 10 copies of the blockchain on computers around the world, and someone, it would be pretty easy for someone to like hack 5 of those at the same time. But if the more and more and more you add, the harder and harder it gets. So that makes the system much stronger. Now, if you want, that will take up a ton of space on your computer, like lots and lots of space, many, many gigabytes. And so the next level of support for the network is actually mining, where you're processing the transactions. And so not only do you keep a copy of the chain, but you're actually helping to upload those transactions to the blockchain. And so people who do that will actually get a small cryptocurrency reward for actually helping the network in that way. So there's different levels of participation. And I just kind of want to read your question again to make sure I got it all. Yeah, so essentially it just depends on how integrated you really want to be with the system. I think you asked if it was regulated. It's not regulated. So it's not regulated at all. There isn't like, you know, a government that decides the rules. Most of the rules are hard coded into the system. So for example, there's only ever going to be 21 million Bitcoin. There's other rules like that that are just baked right into the code. Now, the entire community is essentially the one that debates and discusses on improvements to the network, and then people will code that into the next iterations of the chain. But that's all done by community, what do you call it? Consensus, essentially. So if the group, let's say, decides to code in something new and you don't agree with that, you don't have to download that new version of the software. And so it's really like if you get enough people that don't agree, the software will split and you'll have 2 different chains, and people will go on supporting the chain that they think best supports their values, which is pretty cool.
Perfect. So Aisha wants to ask, as more and more people will start using it for the tiniest thing in every stage, won't it create a mess due to lack of categorization and management by mediators as we had earlier? How will we ensure the optimization and efficiency plus accuracy and speed of the blockchain? Thanks.
That's a good question. I actually see the opposite. I see it's going to create more efficiency as a result. So A really good example for you that happened to me yesterday is I wanted to send money to Kenya to a friend who lives there that I'm working with on a project. And so in order to do that, I had money in my bank. I had to send a wire to him in Kenya to his bank so that he could get it. And what's happened is they're like not answering my emails about sending the wire. I can't get them to do it because I'm locked down. I can't go to the bank to actually physically do it. I tried to use PayPal, but they closed my account for some reason and I can't get into it. With Bitcoin, I literally just send him the money directly and there's nobody in between. Like if he could accept Bitcoin on his end, then I could have had this done in 30 seconds because there's no one that's blocking my transactions. You know, like if I wanted to send money to somebody in Iran or Syria right now, I couldn't do it. The bank would just say like, nope, they're sanctioned. We're worried about terrorism. You can't send money there. But what if I'm trying to help my family? Like, why should I be prevented from doing that? So with Bitcoin, I can send it directly. So for me, I think you're actually going to reduce the amount of mess. And it doesn't mean there won't be centralized parties that add value, but you are still always in control of your money. So for example, I have a wallet that the company that builds that wallet is, you know, it's a private company. They do a great job. They've got lots of features on it. But if that wallet company goes under, I still own my Bitcoin and I can still move it to another wallet. Whereas today, if I have my money in a bank and the bank goes under, my money is gone. There's really no recourse for me to get it back. Like if PayPal went under today, my money in PayPal would be gone. So that's really one of the biggest benefits of that. And I think it will create much more efficiency in the world.
Yeah.
Do you mind translating that next question for me? Sorry, I don't speak Arabic.
No, it's totally fine. It's totally. So Ayman is basically asking us to give him a quick summary what we're talking about. So Ayman, hi. I'll be sharing a quick summary of the session on Slack. I'll try to give it in Arabic. فتمام يعني مش مشكلة دلوقتي خالص الملخص السريع. شكرا يا أيمن. شكرا يا أيمن. Okay. No, خلاص. So we can continue with, Aisha again. Okay, hi Aisha. If it's decentralized, how will we monitor and keep a check on the activities to prevent crimes as there is no power given to the authorities? Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so the first thing I want you to think about is when you say, if you ask, you know, how do we stop illegal things? My question to you is illegal where? Because laws are very subjective to the countries where you live in, right? So I'm an atheist, and for me, me existing as a person is illegal in a number of different countries. Most of your haircuts are illegal in North Korea. So it really, you know, you really have to think about like, what does it mean for something to be illegal, and where do you draw the line about like, how do you define what is legal or not legal? Right? So again, the example of like me sending money to Iran, to a family member or something, that's not legal, but is it moral? It's absolutely moral to do that. So why should I be prevented from doing that? Because there's a law around it. So that's the first thing I want you to think about. The second thing I want you to think about is even within the framework of these laws that we've created, and let's look at taxation, for example, as an example. So a lot of people will say, well, how are you going to tax money if governments don't have control over it and that kind of thing? And for me, it's not about looking at how do you change the monetary system so that we can still tax it, but how do you change the taxation system so that it fits with this amazing new monetary system? So I think I would say the same thing around laws. You know, it's like, if you can't get people by tracing their money, how else can you go about stopping crime? You know, I mean, a lot of crime is caused by corruption, and there's not a lot that we're doing about that today, but with blockchain, that's actually going to stop a huge amount of corruption. It's going to stop a huge amount of child trafficking. It's going to stop a lot of other things. So I would look at how do you use blockchains and cryptocurrencies as a tool to stop a lot of the crimes that are happening. And then how do you reform your law enforcement to be able to find other ways to look at stopping crime.
Okay, perfect. So someone is asking, are banks even necessary in a blockchain world?
No. Not really is kind of the answer, but I think you have to look at all of the functions of a bank. I mean, I'm not like super in-depth knowledgeable about everything that they do inside banks, but from a retail level, yeah, not really. But I think you also have to look at everything that they provide. So if banks are providing investment advice and that type of personalized service, yeah, I mean, I think there's still a market for that type of thing, even when people can move money themselves. I think there's also, like, with cryptocurrencies, you own and manage your own money, but a lot of people don't want that responsibility. You know, if I said to you, if you lose your banking password, all your life savings are gone, a lot of people wouldn't really want that, but that's how cryptocurrencies work. And so I still think there's going to be value in certain features and functions of the banking system, but just way fewer than there are today.
That would be very interesting and very nice. Okay. So Osama is asking, he joined lately, but if you mind, I have a question about the core science behind the blockchain technology. By other words, what sort of algorithm used generally to trace a certain process?
Yeah, it's not so much that it's an algorithm, it's more just that the entire thing is public. So if you go on blockchain.com or blockchain.info, you can see like every transaction that comes up. And so that's what makes it so amazing, is that everything is completely transparent while simultaneously being private. I would recommend, if you want to dig into the back end of how blockchains are built and what type of like software coding systems and that sort of thing are used, I would take a look at the first the Bitcoin white paper, which is less of that, but then the Ethereum white paper will show you all about, you know, how they built the back ends of these systems. And there's also a really good book called Mastering Bitcoin by Andreas Antonopoulos that I would check out too. That's got a lot of that information in there.
Great, great. Who's to blame if blockchain goes bad?
Everybody who uses it. That's the reality, is everyone who is a part of the community is kind of a part of blockchain. So if you think about like who's to blame if English goes bad, what does it mean for it to go bad? But then it's really the only way English grows and changes is because the community of speakers changes the words that they use and grows the language and splits the language and all this sort of thing. So yeah, it really depends. I mean, it depends on which blockchain it is. Some of them are more private, some of them are more public. So you know, but there's thousands and thousands of people that have reviewed the code for the Bitcoin blockchain over and over. And I can't remember what the market cap of Bitcoin is, but it's like many, many $billions, and it hasn't been hacked yet in over 10 years. So it's looking pretty good so far.
Okay. So many countries have conservative rules, economy not allowing to have an international payment card, neither cryptocurrencies. Blockchain technology can also have a conflict with local rules. How can we make governments to be more blockchain friendly?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, in a way, like if you're able to get cryptocurrency in those countries, like they can't take it away from you because they have no way to do that. But it doesn't mean it's not illegal, which is sort of this idea that we talked about in the previous question about like, you know, how do you define legality in a moral world? But I think the key thing around governments is really help them see like what are the benefits to government specifically for this technology. So looking at, you know, how could you use this for tax collection? How can you use this for your own supply chains? How can you use this, you know, to improve bill payments, improve identity, there's all these different elements that can really be beneficial from a cost savings perspective for governments, but also from a service delivery perspective. So for example, the case of the blockchain-based birth certificate in Brazil, the parents, instead of having to go to a municipal building and register their child on paper and all that, they had to fill out a form online. It took 5 minutes. It was quick. And so there's all these benefits that, you know, now the government wouldn't have to keep a municipal building open. So I know in Canada, for example, they have a project in the west coast of the country where any corporations that are registered are now verifiable on blockchain. So historically, if you wanted to check that a company was legitimately registered in the province, you had to go to the government, talk to a person, they would check their database and verify everything. But now you can just verify it directly on blockchain. So they don't have to be involved in that process past just doing that initial verification. So I think it's really about incentives. How do you incentivize the government to get on with this technology? You make it worth their while. You show them how they save money, how they make services better. And then that gets their comfort level up around using the technology.
Awesome. Okay. How much blockchain safe to store valid data in case of 51% attack, especially in a big community?
Yeah, so just to clarify, what they're talking about with the 51% attack is if someone is able to hack more than half of all of those computers, they can essentially kind of direct the chain where they want it to go, and the quality of the chain falls apart. So this really comes down to what is the probability of a 51% attack? And that comes down to how many nodes are there in the blockchain. So if you have a really new blockchain that people aren't really on board with yet, there's only 10 or 15 nodes, like, I wouldn't be storing really good data on there. But if you have a really strong public blockchain like a Bitcoin or an Ethereum that have just thousands of nodes all over the world, I think it's pretty safe. The other thing to keep in mind is most people aren't actually storing high volumes of data on a blockchain. They're more storing pointers to where it is, because it can be very expensive to actually store it physically on a blockchain. But yeah, that's essentially it. It really comes down to what is the spread of the chain that you're working with.
Great. So how do you explain that almost hackers are using Bitcoin as a payment method?
So it depends on whether you mean hackers in a positive way, like people at hackathons and cool tech people, or hackers as in like malicious hackers. I think that part of it is around people think the technology is really cool. Like a lot of my friends who work in the tech space are really inspired by this because they just think it's a really awesome new software that people can use. If you're talking about malicious people, well, it's because it's easier to hide crimes. I mean, you're able to do things. You could buy drugs online easier if you want to with Bitcoin because you don't have to go through the banking system. So it's, there's pros and cons to everything, of course. And again, it comes back to like, what is the morality of the laws that are preventing you from doing some of these things? I know there's cases in the United States where they're not allowed to buy marijuana oil, and there's like children that need it to stop seizures. So, now because of Bitcoin, they're able to buy that medication. Does it mean that other people are buying cocaine? Yes, it does. And, that's a problem and we need to fix that. But yeah, I think it's really two things. Computer people think the technology is amazing and really cool and is going to change the world. And it can make transactions you're not allowed to do a lot easier.
Okay, so is it possible for Bitcoin, for example, to get inflation?
So this is the coolest thing about Bitcoin is there's only ever going to be 21 million Bitcoins in the world. And I think there's about 17 million now. And the way new Bitcoin get added is hard-coded into the system. So every time a block gets added to the chain with new transactions, which is about every 10 minutes, the computer that processed those transactions, the miner, will get a little reward of cryptocurrency. And so it's programmed in how much cryptocurrency that's going to be. So Bitcoin is inherently deflationary. And so this is a great protection for people living in countries where inflation is a big problem, places like Argentina, Venezuela, Zimbabwe, South Africa, Iran. You can essentially, like if you lived in Argentina and you bought Bitcoin at its highest price at $20,000, and it's about $8,000 right now, you would still have more money today than if you'd left your money in the Argentine peso because their inflation is such a problem. And that's really where it's like getting government out of money. If you live in a stable country, doesn't sound that appealing, but if you live in a really unstable country where they're not good at managing the financial system, it's actually a lifesaver because you can make sure that your life savings don't go up in smoke.
Great. So Aisha is telling you, thank you so much for the super amazing session. Really learned a lot and got doubts clarified. Thank you, Aisha.
Thank you. Your questions have been amazing. Like, really, really good questions, guys. I'm super impressed.
Awesome. Awesome. What are the top blockchain companies right now?
Yeah, so the biggest companies, the ones that have had the most success, are in and around the conversion of traditional or fiat currencies into cryptocurrencies, and being able to store cryptocurrencies. So there's been a lot of other companies that have come up that have tried things, but the reality is until you can get enough people that are using crypto, all the other functions kind of come after that. So one of the biggest companies in the world is Binance. They're a international exchange that anybody can use. But in order to get money from your local currency into a cryptocurrency, those companies are actually, they're local to your own geography. So Canada has its own crypto exchanges for that. Egypt would have its own, Kenya would have its own. So it's all about finding those in your own country. But the biggest ones worldwide, definitely exchanges are huge. Wallet companies like blockchain.com, Coinbase, and then some of the supply chain and finance applications also very large. But we're going to see that expand, where a lot of the more retail applications and more fringe applications are going to grow significantly in the coming kind of few years anyway.
Awesome, great. So Mohammed is having two questions. Okay, first one, how to prevent my blockchain to be able to be seen modified from only some selected persons. Okay, this is the first question. And the second one is, if my blockchain was attacked by another company building a huge false blockchain, example, my company has 40 nodes, but an attacker has 100 nodes. Okay.
Yeah, so I think the thing to keep in mind is you're mostly not building these small internal blockchains. You're mostly going to be using big public ones. I'm going to sneeze. Hold on. Excuse me. So, if you're really doing important work, you don't really want to be doing that on a blockchain that you build yourself that only has 40 nodes. It's just not, and if all of the nodes are internal and one company is like controlling all of those nodes, you're not really decentralized, right? It's still a centralized system with centralized control over all of those nodes. So you're kind of using a blockchain technically, but you're not getting all the benefits of decentralization. So it's kind of the same thing if you've seen Facebook has their own cryptocurrency called Libra. And they essentially chose, it was about 20 different companies that would host nodes. And you're like, I mean, one, that's not a lot of nodes. Two, if Mark Zuckerberg is controlled and self-selected all of those nodes, it's not really decentralized. He could really just say, you know what, we don't like what happened with that transaction. I'd like you all to, change it. Like we're gonna dump this and move on to a new blockchain. And they could just do that. So for me, it's really not so much about, are you just using a blockchain, but how strong is that blockchain? How public is that blockchain? Because yeah, as you say, like if your attacker controls 100 nodes and you only control 40, then you don't have a blockchain that is 51% attack proof at all. So it's just a centralized control chain. So it won't work for you in that way. You might as well just get a database.
Makes sense. Okay, thank you. I guess we have answered all the questions.
That's great. You guys had such good questions. I'm really impressed.
Thank you so much, Anne. It was amazing. It was amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and good luck with the hackathon, and keep hacking. Technology is going to change the world, and I hope all of you will learn all about cryptocurrencies and how to get involved in the community. Check out meetup.com for local meetups in your country. And there's also really good resources around how to become a programmer on ethereum.org. And yeah, if you want to follow me on Twitter, I'm at Anne_Connelly, and you can find me on my website as well, anneconnelly.ca.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you. Okay, guys, thank you so much for attending. This was a super interactive session. Thank you all. Okay.